Realistically, Space Marine 3 is still several years out. However, that doesn't mean that we can't start making our Christmas wish list for the content that we'd like to see in it whenever it eventually drops. So today, I want to discuss what types of enemies do you want to square off against whenever we finally get Space Marine 3. If Space Marine 3 does follow Space Marine 1 and 2 in its enemy types and layouts, we'll most likely be seeing a new xeno species to fight and also a new traitor legion as well to engage in combat with. So that's what we're going to talk about today. What xeno I would like to see featured in Space Marine 3, and also what Chaos Legion I am hoping that we will also get to see. So let me just say, the Space Marine 2, I absolutely love the Tyranids. I was a big Flood fan whenever it came to Halo, and there's just a fair bit of similarities between the two that made me really excited for Space Marine 2, knowing that the Tyranids were going to be playing a large part. And I think that if you're going to follow up the Tyranids, there's really only one other Xeno species we should really focus on, and that's the Necrons. I say this not only because I think they're just absolutely cool, but the fact as well that they were teased a little bit in Space Marine 2 during a couple of the campaign missions where we got to see some of the pyramids. I believe we even heard Lieutenant Titus telling the rest of the squad that they would call it up to the Order of Xenos, everything like that. So the stage has kind of already been set. But the other thing that I like too about the Necrons is their technology is very unique. They are an incredibly advanced species, and I think with that opens up a lot of gameplay options. Now, even though they are a super advanced race, they definitely have the technological edge over the Imperium. That doesn't mean, though, that they would be relegated to just one type, or one archetype rather, of enemy where it's just going to be a constant shooting gallery. They do engage in melee combat, and one of the first things that comes to mind for me whenever I think of Necrons is the flayed ones, and I think that would open up some really awesome melee combat. For those of you that don't know, the flayed ones, they are kind of a subsect of the Necrons that have come down with essentially a curse or like a disease, even though they are kind of consciousness that's been added into robot bodies, I guess you could call it that to keep it simple. But they have this belief that they're constantly hungry for meat, and they can never satiate it because, well, they don't have any mouths. There's also been a couple other variants of this that have existed within the 40k universe, but typically they just spawn in anywhere in the galaxy where there's a lot of bloodshed and just go absolutely visceral with anything in the battlefield, just trying to satiate their need for flesh. So in terms of Xeno species, for me, Necrons, hands down rather, I really think they would be a great addition to this game, and gameplay wise they open up so many possibilities. Now, in terms of the Chaos Legions that I'd like to see featured in the next game, first, let me just give an honorable mention to old Grandpa Nurgle himself and his Death Guard boys. They're definitely a fan favorite. They're also one of my particular favorite Chaos Legions as well. But I am going to be picking a different group, but I still think they deserve a shout out. The Death Guard, it's the chef's kiss when it comes to body horror. Not only do they have a really cool backstory, but their units look awesome as well, especially when you figure that they've all just been riddled with disease, and you see all the different ways that Nurgle's gifts have affected them. I think they look absolutely cool. And plus, as well, the Nurgle demons, like the Nurglings, I'm not gonna lie, they're kind of the bros. Even though they're incredibly disgusting, just from reading the Dark Imperium trilogy, there's been a couple spots in there where you get to read the story through their point of view, and they're just funny. Like, I do think that they would add a little bit of a comic relief if they were executed right. I do believe it could be done properly. But I think the Death Guard would definitely... I would not be upset if I saw the Death Guard being added in Space Marine 3. Now, my personal pick is actually going to be probably a Chaos Legion that not too many people are a fan of, and I understand why, but I would love to see them make it into a game, and that's got to be the Word Bearers. So my reasoning for picking the Word Bearers out of every other Chaos Legion deals a little bit with the lore, but also I think the possibilities in terms of gameplay and fun is a little bit higher than most of the other Chaos Legions. So lore-wise, the Word Bearers and the Ultramarines, who have been the main characters of the Space Marine games, do have quite a bit of history. So the Ultramarines were the chapter that were tasked with the burning of Monarchia, which was one of the capital cities controlled by the Word Bearers, which honestly kind of kick-started the Horus Heresy before Horus even fell. The background to that is the Word Bearers, they were the original group to worship and venerate the Emperor of Mankind as a god, which went against everything that he was looking for. And a lot of the planets that they would conquer during the Great Crusade, they actually tried to build up the emperors, hey, even though you're being forced into joining the Imperium, we got this god emperor here, he really wants the best for you. And they did leverage that as a way to really build up a lot of the worlds that they conquered. I think a lot of people don't give the Word Bearers enough credit for just how massive of a force and how well they did during the Great Crusade. But anyways, the Ultramarines, they were the ones tasked with burning down Monarchia, which greatly upset Lorgar, and also just the Word Bearers in general, which honestly is understandable. Even Gilliman thought it was a bad idea, basically kind of told the Emperor and Malcador, like, hey, let's not be too hasty here. Maybe let me go talk to them. Let's maybe not burn, their capital city to the ground. And, I think a lot of people can agree the Emperor, maybe not the best dad, almost a textbook of what not to do as being a father. But I think that's where a lot of the rivalry really started between these two specific chapters, was with the burning of Monarchia. But then also during the heresy itself, the Word Bearers reveal that they have joined Horus by attacking Calth, and they really did make the Space Marines pay for it. Or, I'm sorry, they're all Space Marines, but the Ultramarines pay for it. Granted, the Ultramarines, they did win. However, it did come at quite a cost, and understandably, their two chapters have been rivals for a very long time. Now, one of the other reasons that I think the Word Bearers would be really cool is, kind of as I mentioned earlier, they do borrow a lot from religious inspiration. So originally, they venerated the Emperor of Mankind as a god. However, after the burning of Monarchia, especially through Erebus, they ended up worshiping the Chaos Gods. And they didn't just worship one in particular, like the Thousand Sons tend to align themselves more with Tzeentch, or the Death Guard with Nurgle, World Eaters with Khorne. They are open to worshiping all of them because they feel that they are all gods and worthy of worship. So I think one of the benefits that we would get to having the Word Bearers be the next Chaos Legion would simply be the fact that we could explore potential options for all four of the Chaos Gods. Now, I would throw out that, as cool as I think that would be, I wouldn't want to see them go super in-depth with just one particular Chaos God, just because if we get a Space Marine 4 at some point in the future, and maybe they choose to go with like the Death Guard, I don't want players to feel burned out whenever it finally gets to that point. But, like I said, they do venerate all the Chaos Gods, so you could get a little bit of Khorne, you could get a little bit of Nurgle, you could also get a little bit of Slaanesh, which, again, I think some of the options that we would just have with the Word Bearers being the next Chaos Legion opens up a lot of really fun doors for players, and also more unique gameplay options than what we currently get. Especially when you look at the Thousand Sons, I do enjoy fighting them. However, I do feel that they are a little boring from time to time. They're definitely not as fun as the Tyranids. But I think with the Word Bearers, we have a lot more options, which is only going to make all the different engagements that you can have and replaying through, if Space Marine 3 does continue with operations, would make them feel a lot more unique, because maybe you run around where instead of Yeah, instead of getting a bunch of word bearers that are following Tzeentch and seeing, maybe some of those demons, maybe you get a round where it's more focused on, let's say, the Death Guard. Or maybe you just get around where you get to see a nice conglomeration of all four. Plus, the word bearers could still function as genuine Space Marines, just kind of like the Rubric Marines as well. So you do also have that range combat, and you can still see sorcery and just all sorts of different opportunities present themselves. But that's my thoughts and opinions. Granted, like I said before, the game is still going to be years away. Space Marine 2 still being pretty heavily supported by Saber at this time. But let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments. Who would you like to square off against? And do you feel that maybe there's some other species out there or Chaos Legions that would fit better than my personal thoughts or what we currently have? As always, I appreciate hearing from you all, and we'll catch you next time. And now we can just go into the actual stuff since we got that part done.